This year, Diwali or Deepavali falls on October 31st, which many of you recognize as Halloween. I'm interpreting this as a sign from the cosmos that it is finally time that we talk about Indian horror movies. Hello everyone, my name is Kara means spooky. Welcome to my channel. It's fucking Halloween, you guys! And I cannot be more excited to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects in the whole world, horror movies. Horror fans are pretty unique in that they're a subsection of movie buffs that will go out of their way to watch international movies. And when I say international, I'm referring to basically any movie that was made outside of the American movie industry. When we look at international horror films, the focus is often on movies from Europe, Latin America, East Asia, and Southeast Asia, but Indian horror movies are almost always left out of that conversation. I've always wondered why that is, so today I want to discuss why I don't think Indian horror movies get any love from abroad, and later I will also be giving my recommendations for Indian horror movies that I think you would like. The first reason that I think Indian horror movies don't get talked about enough in the West is because there is a profound lack of awareness. I don't think Americans are even aware that Indians make horror movies. Shudder, which is a streaming app that's dedicated to horror movies and horror TV shows, doesn't have any Indian movies in their international tab. While I think that streaming rights also has a lot to do with it, you know, like maybe Shudder just can't afford to stream Indian movies on their app, I also think they don't have any Indian movies because there's no interest in them. And there's no interest in Indian horror movies because people aren't even aware they exist. The average American's understanding of Indian culture does not extend beyond Indian food, and their understanding of Indian food does not extend beyond naan and chicken tikka masala. If that. People just assume that India's entire movie industry is just Bollywood and it's all just singing and dancing. If you're not aware, Bollywood is just the term for the Hindi language movie industry in India. That's not even considering all the other films that exist in other languages within India. For instance, there's Kollywood for Tamil films, Tollywood for Telugu films, Sandalwood for Kannada films, so on and so forth, you get the point. That brings me to my second reason, and I think this one's the biggest one. There is a lack of accessibility to Indian horror films. All the movies I'm gonna mention in this video, you can easily find them for free online, but there's one catch. It's not in English, and there's no English subtitles. For instance, Bhool Bhulaiyaa, which is a very popular Hindi horror film, is on YouTube in its entirety for free. The only problem is, I don't know what they're saying. This has been my biggest frustration. Even when I'm using completely legal methods to track down these highly recommended horror films, I'm always able to find them, that too dubbed in a variety of languages. It's just that there's no English subtitles. And you know, I don't think India owes it to anybody to make their films accessible to the English-speaking world. I mean, if you want to gatekeep, that's fine. It's just it makes it harder for people like me who want to expand their horizons. I'd also like to point out that Indian horror films tend to blur the line between genres. The more popular horror films tend to be horror comedies rather than just straight horror, but chances are you're also in for some drama, some action, some romance, and of course, the odd song and dance sequence. But you have to remember that India has been making movies for as long as Hollywood has. Therefore, it only makes sense that India has developed its own unique style of film that is completely different than anything that comes out of the West. I kind of like the fact that Indian film industries aren't trying to appease the taste of the West and they're more so catering to its own people. Me personally, I am a fan of straight horror rather than just horror comedies. I don't mind the genre mixing, but if there's a song and dance sequence, I'm fast forwarding. I'm sorry. I hate musicals, okay? Even when I watch Disney movies, I fast forward the songs. If that makes me a miserable and whimsyless person, so be it. My last point about why I don't think Indian horror movies get enough appreciation, and this one's a little controversial, I believe the West has a subconscious refusal to take Indian media seriously. Whether it's movies, music, or even influencers, oftentimes the West is only paying attention to Indian media just to laugh at them, you know? And while I agree that some of the stuff that comes out of India is pretty laughable, I think it's taking up too much space in the public's mind to the point where it's overshadowing the stuff that's actually good and deserves our attention. You could say that things are changing today, what with Natu Natu winning the Oscar for Best Original Song in 2023. So let's keep the ball rolling in that direction, shall we? I've seen enough Indian horror movies at this point to notice some universal elements that are present in all of them. So here are my top 5 Indian horror movie tropes. Feel free to add on to the list in the comments. Number 1, hot woman gets possessed by demon/ghost. Classic, can't go wrong with this one.
आज भी तुझ में इतनी हिम्मत है कि तू मेरे सामने खड़ा है। आज दुर्गाष्टमी है, तेरा गला काट के तेरा खून पीना है। तेरे मुर्दे पे मुझे ताना है।
Number 2, when it's raining, that means shit is about to hit the fan. Good things never happen when it's raining. Number 3, someone says,
"So what if someone died in this house? That doesn't mean anything. People die all the time. You can't blame that on the house, can you?"
Number 4, ridiculously intense jump scares. Now, I know jump scares are intense by nature, but I've noticed that in Indian horror movies, they tend to come out of nowhere, oftentimes with very little warning, and the accompanying music is extremely loud too. Listen, heart disease is rampant in our community. I have to assume that this is the filmmaker's attempt to thin the herd. Which brings me to number 5, and this is my only gripe with Indian horror movies. The background music is too fucking loud. And for what? Do you want me to focus on the scene, or do you want me to focus on the 100-piece orchestra that's playing in the background?
First time.
Alrighty, so now let's get into my recommendations. I did my best to include a variety of languages in this list because I didn't want my recommendations to be too Hindi-centric. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about each film and what I thought of it. In addition, each film will be receiving a McGidris score to tell you how scary the movie was. McGidris, of course, stands for the Mr. Incredible Gets Increasingly Disturbed ranking system. It's pretty self-explanatory. The score of the film corresponds with the face I was making whilst watching the film. Number 1 is not scary at all, you know, just fun for the whole family. 2 is mildly scary, you know, a little bit spooky, just enough to get you into the Halloween spirit. 3 is consider me spooked. You got me. You got me good. 4 is, now that's what I call scary. Now that's what I call a nightmare-inducing film. And my favorite ranking, 5. 5 is shit your pants scary. 5 is wear your brown pants when watching this movie. 5 is, I think 5 years were taken off my lifespan because of this movie. It Lives Inside. This movie is about an Indian-American teenager, played by Megan Suri, struggling to reconcile her Indian upbringing with her American surroundings. When she realizes that her childhood friend is being tormented by a demon that lives in a glass jar, she decides to take action to save her friend's life. This movie was so good. I always thought that Megan Suri was the standout actress from Never Have I Ever, so it was really nice to see her in another role, especially a role that is in like a completely different genre. I'm giving this movie a 4. It's very spooky. It's very creepy. I love the lighting of the film. I love how this movie teases the audience with the demon and leaves you guessing what it looks like up until the very end. The plot of this movie is very unique. I can't say I've seen any other horror movie like this, but I will say I am getting kind of tired of the whole I hate being Indian trope. You know, I can see how it's relatable for some people, but I just think it's kind of overplayed at this point, and I'm eager to see Indian people on screen that are just being unapologetically authentic. This is the first full feature-length film from writer and director Bishal Datta, so I really hope that he comes out with more horror movies in the future, because for a debut film, this was wild. Although this is an American production, I'm still including this one in the list, and I'm making it the first on the list because this is what sparked my interest in Indian horror. There is so much within Indian culture and mythology that lends itself to a good, scary story. So after watching this movie, I thought to myself, why isn't there more like this out there? The House Next Door. This movie follows two neighboring households, a newlywed couple and a family whose teenage daughter starts exhibiting bizarre behaviors. When her father and the neighboring neurosurgeon attempt to figure out what's wrong with her, they realize that it is not mental illness, but rather a malevolent and sinister force that was laying dormant in their house for decades, waiting for the right time to come out. This movie is a fascinating blend of cultures. You have a family of Pentecostal Christians living next door to a Hindu couple who enlist the help of a nomad psychic, all the while they're being plagued by Chinese ghosts. I would give this movie a Megidra score of 5. It is absolutely terrifying. There's jump scares, there's paranormal horror, there's possession. It's freaky, it's spooky, it's terrifying. It's a really great watch, and I'm just a sucker for a good demonic possession movie. I've seen some people online compare this film to The Conjuring. I mean, all demonic possession movies kind of follow the same formula anyways, but I do think this film's plot is unique enough. It is different enough from The Conjuring. And this movie's theme is quite unique because it tackles a problem that I believe is specific to Asian cultures. I can't say any more without spoiling the film. One last thing I want to point out is that the neurosurgeon in this movie works at a place called Silent Hill Hospital. Oh, what's that? I have a brain tumor, and the only cure is to get life-saving surgery that's only offered at Silent Hill Hospital? No thanks. I think I'll just die slowly and painfully, the way God intended. The next movie I want to talk about is Gone. This movie is about a woman who finds herself home alone on a night when there's a manhunt for a serial killer that's on the loose. To make matters worse, a man shows up at her front door and insists that she lets him in and does not take no for an answer. I'm not a fan of slasher movies, but I really liked this one. Just when you think you know what's gonna happen next, something else batshit crazy happens. It's almost as if you're living this night with this woman, who is played by the fabulous Urmila Matondkar. I watched this movie a million years ago when I was way too young to be watching it, and it was super scary to me. And I rewatched it recently, and you know, maybe my brain is perma-fried from watching too many horror films, but it wasn't that bad. I would give this a Megidra score of 3. You know, there's suspense, there's jump scares, there's gore, there's the 90s Bollywood staple of overdramatic music and zoom-ins. What's not to love? This film was directed by Ram Gopal Verma, and another great horror film that he directed that also stars Urmila Matondkar is Bhoot. This movie follows a couple in Mumbai that moves into a new flat. Despite the husband being told that the previous tenant killed herself by jumping from the balcony, he still chose to move in with his wife because, remember, people die all the time and you can't blame the house for that. Surprise, surprise, the wife starts seeing things in the apartment and acting strangely. Who could have seen that coming? Certainly not her shithead husband. Although I watched this movie for the first time recently, this movie gave me really strange nostalgic vibes. Like, this very much seems like something me and my sister would watch together on a Sunday afternoon. The Y2K vibes are very strong with this one. I am also a huge fan of Rekha and her gorgeous greige lipstick, and just Rekha in general. I like that this movie literally starts off with a warning that if you're pregnant or if you have a weak heart, you shouldn't watch this movie. I didn't think there was anything in this movie that would induce a heart attack or a miscarriage. I would give this a Megidra score of 3. Like, it has its moments, it's spooky, it's scary. There's a lot of jump scares, and I think the director does a really good job of setting up the spooky atmosphere, but it's not something that would make me lose sleep or, you know, anything like that. Perhaps the most panic-inducing thing to me of this whole movie was this absolutely absurd staircase. Fun fact about me, well, not so fun fact, but every single person in my family has fallen down a staircase at least once, resulting in moderate to severe injury. We're a very clumsy bunch. If we were the ones moving into this flat, within 5 minutes of moving in, we don't even need a ghost to push us. We'll fall off these stairs all on our own. Within a week, I guarantee you these stairs would have taken out my entire family.
He needs some milk.
I'm including this next movie on the list because if you ask anybody that grew up in a Tamil household, they will tell you that this movie traumatized them as a child. Chandramukhi is a horror comedy film that follows the story of a couple who purchases a mansion that was once the palace of a king. They later learn that this mansion is haunted by Chandramukhi, a dancer that was burnt alive in this mansion by the king when she did not reciprocate his feelings and was caught having an affair with another male dancer. The wife, played by the actress Jyotika, releases the spirit of Chandramukhi into the mansion and begins to show signs that she is possessed by the spirit of this dancer. So this film is the Tamil remake of the original film that was made in Malayali in 1993. There has also been iterations of this film in Telugu, Hindi, and Kannada. Safe to say, this is a very popular story. This is not exactly your typical horror movie. You would think that the focal point of this film would be Jyotika, the beautiful woman that's being possessed by the ghost. But no, the focal point is Rajnikant, who is just some friend of the couple that happens to show up at the time of all of this happening. The movie starts off with Rajnikant painstakingly beating up 50 plus men one at a time for whatever reason. Includes several song and dance sequences where Rajnikant is dancing like the drunk uncle at a wedding, and ends with Rajnikant saving the day and curing Jyotika of her possession. The one scene, however, that makes this whole movie worth it is the Ra Ra song, where Jyotika's possession reaches its climax. The way she dances, her facial expressions, is just absolutely chilling. Like, it's 10 out of 10 out of 10. It's just so fulfilling to see talented artists just do what they were born to do, which is perform. It was a fun little watch, I will say that. But this movie's not scary. This is a Megidra score of 1. Like, if you watched this as a kid and found it scary, I'm sorry, but you're soft. There was a Chandramukhi 2 that was released somewhat recently, which I did not watch, but according to my mom, it is a complete and utter waste of time. Her words, not mine. Staying in line with Tamil films, the next movie we have is Demonte Colony. This is a horror comedy about an aspiring horror filmmaker and his 3 friends. When they're out late one night after drinking too much, he suggests to his friends that they visit an abandoned mansion in Demonte Colony that once belonged to a Portuguese businessman. This was so he could get inspiration for his next film, but as it turns out, they picked up far more than just inspiration. The next morning, they go to an astrologer to have their fortunes read, and they get less than fortunate readings, and it's all basically downhill from there. I was surprised by how much I liked this film. I normally don't like horror comedies, but there were scenes in this movie that had me straight up laughing out loud.
நீங்க உங்க இருக்கவங்க இதுக்கு இங்கே இருக்க
ஐயா என்னோட வாழ்க்கை எப்படி இருக்குங்க ஐயா
வாழ்க்கை அவனாவது கடைசி வரைக்கும் தண்டு சோறு தின்னு பொழைச்சுக்குவான் நீ எல்லாம் பிறந்ததே ஒரு சாபக்கேடு முடிஞ்சா இன்னைக்கே போய் செத்துரு மறுபடியும் பிறந்து வா அப்போவாது உனக்கு ஓலை ஒழுங்கா வருதான்னு பார்க்கலாம்.
What would you do if you went to a palm reader and they were just like, bro, it's so over. Like, do yourself a favor and end it today. The first half of this movie was the comedy, and the second half of this movie was the scary. I will say it picked up around the halfway point. I would give this movie a 2. It can be creepy at times, but I have to give credit where credit is due. This is the only movie on my list with absolutely no jump scares, so props to you guys for that. A sequel to this movie, Demonte Colony 2, was released recently, and by that I mean it was released this year, so can't wait to watch that one once someone translates it for me. The next movie is Bhootakaalam. Bhoothakaalam is a movie about a single mother and her adult son. They both care for the aging matriarch of the family who is very ill and passes away one night. While the mother struggles to keep the household together, her son struggles to find a job and develops a drinking and smoking problem. Soon, the son starts to see things in his home, which is written off as just alcohol-induced hallucinations. Or is it? This is more serious than all the other movies on this list. It is a bit sad because it deals with depression and grief and addiction and failure. In other words, it's very relatable. I didn't know what to expect when I watched this movie. I literally just Googled best Malayali horror films, and this was the most highly recommended one. If there was ever such a thing as a shit-your-pants scary Indian film, it's this one. This is a 5. So scary. It's a slow burn. They spin the story at a very good pace, and they really set it up for something absolutely horrifying to happen. It's just such a fantastic watch. I've always wanted to visit Kerala because it looks like such a beautiful state, but after watching this movie, I'm starting to have second thoughts. I mean, if you can make a movie so scary that it literally deters tourists, I would say job well done. I had to include at least one movie in my native language of Kannada, so the last movie on my list is Kantara. Taking place in a village in Karnataka in 1990, the movie focuses on a village's struggle to retain control of their land from forest officers that want to turn their land into a reserve, and a landlord with self-serving intentions. Nowhere was this ever advertised as a horror movie, but this movie is very heavy with its themes of spirituality. There's scenes of people becoming possessed by the spirit of Panjurli Deva, or the demigod that protects the forest and looks after the villagers. That sounds pretty spooky to me. I love the scenes depicting the Bhootakaalam, which I've never seen before, neither in real life nor in films, so I thought that was pretty interesting to watch. I've always found the mixture of religion and horror so fascinating. I would love to see more horror movies with Hindu-based themes. I can see how that would be a rather sensitive topic to make movies about, what with the Indian Board of Censorship working overtime to protect its citizens from the big bad evil moving pictures. I think it just takes a lot of cultural sensitivity and creativity, like in the case of Kantara. The protagonist of this movie, a villager named Shiva, in my opinion, he's kind of an asshole. I just think he's kind of a show-off, and he's rather aggressive in his attempts to flirt with Leela, who's his love interest in the movie. I just know if I lived in the village with this guy, I would absolutely hate his guts. Despite all of that, I still found myself rooting for him because he's anti-establishment and very anti-landlord, two causes that I can get behind. I'm giving this movie a 2 because there's a handful of jump scares, and also the ending scene is hardcore as fuck. So there you have it. There are my recommendations for you. Sure, it's fun to watch white people get tormented for an hour and a half, but this Diwali, why not switch things up and watch Indian people get tormented for 2.5 hours instead? If you give any of these movies a watch, please let me know what you think. What are your thoughts on this subject? Why do you think Indian horror movies don't get any love from abroad? And finally, if you have any Indian horror movies that I did not mention in this video but you would recommend, please feel free to share with the class, and try to include where you were able to find this movie with English subtitles, because if there's no subtitles, I can't watch it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to follow me on my Instagram for all of my embroidery art and my daily deranged thoughts. Subscribe if you want to see more. Have a happy Halloween and happy Deepavali to those of you who are celebrating, and I will catch you in the next one. Until then, unpleasant dreams. I'd blow this out, but you're not supposed to.